It is 5:12 in the morning. The city of San Francisco is asleep. Then the ground moves. Not a tremor, a convulsion. For roughly 60 seconds, the earth throws the city sideways, buckling streets, snapping church steeples, folding brick walls into the road below. Horses scream in the dark. Whole facades peel away and crash into the empty avenues. And when the shaking finally stops, an eerie silence falls, because most of the city is still standing. That is the part almost everyone gets wrong. The earthquake did not destroy San Francisco. It cracked it. It rattled it. It killed people, yes, and it left terrible scars. But the great majority of the buildings that would matter most were still upright when the dust settled. The real killer had not arrived yet. It was already being born, quietly, in 1,000 places at once, inside the broken walls and severed pipes of the sleeping city. And over the next 3 days, it would do what the earth in all its fury could not. The fault that ruptured that morning was the San Andreas. Nearly 296 miles of it tore open in seconds, an earthquake later estimated at magnitude 7.9. The rupture raced up the coast faster than a man could run. Roads split. Fences that crossed the fault were left offset by 20 feet, one half of the world simply sliding past the other. It was one of the most powerful quakes ever recorded on the North American continent, and the shock was felt from Oregon down to Los Angeles. But here is what that violence did in the crowded heart of the city. It shattered gas lines, running through the walls of thousands of wooden homes. It knocked over stoves still warm from the night before. It snapped brick chimneys and spilled live embers across dry wooden floors. In a city built largely of timber, that was a death sentence. Within minutes, more than 30 separate fires had ignited across San Francisco at once, sending columns of smoke up into the dawn sky. Think about the difference. The earthquake lasted about a minute, and for most of the city, it was survivable. The fire lasted 3 days, and in those 3 days, it would burn through nearly 500 city blocks. One disaster damaged hundreds of buildings. The one that followed would consume tens of thousands. In any other city, 30 fires would have been a hard morning for the fire department, but a winnable one. San Francisco had a capable, modern fire service. It had hydrants. It had crews who knew these streets. On any normal day, they would have knocked those fires down before noon. But April 18th, 1906, was not a normal day, because the same quake that lit the fires had also struck down the one man best prepared to fight them. Fire Chief Dennis Sullivan had spent years warning the city that its water supply was dangerously fragile, begging for a backup system in case the mains ever failed. He had been ignored. When the shaking began, the ornate tower of the hotel next door collapsed straight through his quarters. He fell 3 floors into the wreckage. Mortally injured, he would linger for days and never direct the fight he had trained his whole life for. And then his crews reached the hydrants, opened them, and discovered the nightmare he had feared. Nothing came out. The earthquake had ruptured the water mains beneath the streets. The reservoirs still held water, but the pipes that carried it into the city were broken in hundreds of places. The firefighters had their hoses, their trucks, their courage. What they did not have was water. Imagine standing in front of a burning building with a hose in your hands and knowing that behind you is an entire bay full of water you cannot reach. That is what these men faced, block after block, hour after hour. Small fires that could have been drowned in minutes were left to grow unchecked. Some crews resorted to beating flames with wet blankets and shoveling dirt, and as the fires grew, they began to reach for one another, feeling across rooftops and alleys toward a single, terrible union. By the end of the first day, the separate fires had begun to merge. What had been 30 problems was becoming one moving wall of flame. And the men in charge of the city were about to make a decision that over the next 2 days would turn a disaster into a catastrophe. With no water to fight the flames, the authorities reached for the only weapon they had left. If they could not put the fire out, they would starve it. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Blow up the buildings standing directly in the fire's path, and tear open gaps too wide for the flames to leap across. Empty, flattened ground cannot burn. So the order went out across the smoke-choked city. Dynamite San Francisco in order to save it. Brigadier General Frederick Funston brought in the army. Mayor Eugene Schmitz signed off on the demolitions. In theory, it was sound. Fire breaks are a real tactic used to this day, but there was a catch that would prove fatal. The men handed the explosives had almost no idea how to use them, and the pressure of a burning city left no time to learn. They used too much. They placed the charges wrong. And again, instead of clearing empty gaps, the blast blew burning debris and splinters of flaming wood out across the rooftops of buildings that had not yet caught. Homes that the fire had not reached were suddenly showered in embers. The dynamite was not stopping the fire. It was sowing it. It got worse. When they ran short of dynamite, some crews turned to black powder, which does not simply shatter a building. It hurls it, throwing burning fragments even farther. There are accounts of entire mansions along Van Ness that were sacrificed to make a fire break, only for the poorly set charges to fling flame across the very gap they were meant to create. General Funston, meanwhile, became so fixated on finding more explosives that he pulled Navy tugboats off the waterfront, boats that were actually pumping seawater onto the flames, and sent them away to fetch more dynamite. One of the few things fighting the fire with real water was ordered to stop, so the city could keep blowing itself up. For 3 days, it burned. Day and night, the sky over San Francisco glowed a sick orange, the smoke visible for 100 miles. Refugees dragged trunks up the hills and watched their neighborhoods vanish behind them. Some later swore the dynamite blasts did more to spread the flames than any broken gas main ever had. The cure had become the disease. Among those who fled was the most famous voice in the world. The great Italian tenor Enrico Caruso had performed at the Opera House the very night before, to a packed and glittering house. He woke to a shaking hotel, plaster raining down around him, and staggered out into the street, clutching a signed photograph of himself. The story goes that he was so shaken he could barely force a single note from his legendary throat. Terrified the trauma had ruined his voice forever. He escaped the city by ferry and train and vowed he would never return to San Francisco as long as he lived. He never did. When the fire finally died on the 3rd day, partly beaten back, partly just out of anything left to burn, the survivors climbed the hills and looked down on what remained. It did not look like a city that had been damaged. It looked like a city that had been erased. Bare brick chimneys stood alone in gray fields of ash where whole neighborhoods had been the week before. The financial district, the great hotels, the mansions on the hill, all of it flattened into an unrecognizable moonscape. The scale of it was almost impossible to take in. The numbers are staggering. Around 490 city blocks gone, roughly 25,000 buildings destroyed. When it was over, close to 80% of San Francisco had been wiped from the map. And of that ruin, the great majority was not the work of the earthquake at all. It was the fire. Of the city's roughly 400,000 residents, as many as 250,000 were suddenly homeless, more than half the city with nowhere to sleep. They flooded into Golden Gate Park and the Presidio, pitching tents on the grass, cooking meals in the street because damaged chimneys were banned, standing in long bread lines while soldiers patrolled under martial law with orders to shoot looters on sight. The army would eventually build thousands of tiny wooden earthquake cottages, little more than sheds, to shelter the refugees through the coming winter. But the story that the city would tell the world about that winter had a very deliberate hole in it. When officials finally announced how many people had died, they gave a number: 478. It was printed, repeated, and carved into the record as fact. And it was almost certainly a lie. Because San Francisco in 1906 was not just a city in mourning. It was a business, and it was terrified. Its leaders knew that rebuilding would take an enormous fortune, and that fortune would have to come from investors and insurance houses and banks back east. Who, they asked themselves, would pour money into a city that had just buried thousands of its own people, a city sitting on a fault line that had already proven it could kill? A low death toll was not just comforting. It was a sales pitch, and so a decision was made. So the count was kept low, and the dead were quietly overlooked. Nowhere more than in Chinatown, whose residents were barely counted at all. Their losses treated as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. For decades, the official figure held. But researchers who went back through the records came to a very different, much darker number. Their conclusion was that the true death toll was not hundreds. It was more than 3,000, 6 times the official count, and possibly more. It took until the 21st century for the city itself to formally accept that figure. For nearly 100 years, thousands of the dead had simply been left out of their own city's history to protect its property values. There was one more twist, this one written in the fine print of insurance policies. Many San Franciscans were insured against fire, but not against earthquake. So when they filed their claims, the incentive was obvious. Say it was the fire. Even homes cracked open by the quake were quietly set alight so their owners could collect. They called it, grimly, shake and bake. It meant that some of the burning in those 3 days was not the disaster spreading. It was people finishing the job, torching their own damaged homes so a policy would pay out. The line between what the earthquake destroyed and what the fire destroyed was blurred not just by chaos, but by money. Everyone, it seemed, needed the fire to be the villain. And in the strangest way, that same instinct to look forward instead of back became the city's salvation. San Francisco refused to mourn for long. Almost before the ashes had cooled, the rebuilding began, faster and more furiously than anyone had thought possible. Rubble was dumped into the bay to make brand new land. Streets were relaid over the ruins. Banks reopened for business in canvas tents while the ground was still warm beneath them. Within just 9 years, the city that had been 80% destroyed did something almost unthinkable. It threw a party for the entire world. In 1915, San Francisco hosted the Panama Pacific International Exposition, a dazzling World's Fair built on reclaimed land, a monument in stucco and light, announcing that the city had not only survived, it had come back stronger. But walk that ground today, and it is worth remembering what lies buried beneath the recovery. A city that survived the earthquake, only to be undone by the fire it had accidentally lit. A rescue plan that spread the very flames it was meant to stop. owners who set light to their own ruined homes for a payout, and a death toll deliberately buried, thousands of names left off the record so that the investment would keep flowing. The lesson of 1906 is not really about a fault line. Fault lines are indifferent. The lesson is about the choices that came after. A broken water main that no one had truly prepared for. Dynamite handed to men who could not aim it. And a number, 478, chosen not because it was true, but because it was convenient. The earth shook for about a minute that morning. Everything else that followed, the fire, the dynamite, the cover-up, was human. San Francisco likes to tell the story of a great earthquake it heroically survived. The fuller story is of a city that survived the earthquake and was then, in 3 long days, largely destroyed by the people trying to save it.